It was just another day on the streets of Sterling Point. Frank Miller and Tony Russo, two cops with faded uniforms and faded consciences, sat in their beat-up patrol car, their eyes scanning familiar territory for a chance to make some extra money. They didn't call it a bribe. No, to them it was just a hidden reward for unrecognized community service. And then, it happened. The shiny black Mercedes E-Class slid slowly around the curve that led to Riverfront Boulevard. The afternoon sun made the car's paint glow in a subtle halo. But what really caught their attention was the woman behind the wheel, a beautiful, elegant black woman, dressed in a perfectly tailored designer suit, long wavy hair that fell gently over her shoulders, Gucci sunglasses glinting on the bridge of her delicate nose. It was all too perfect, and too unusual by their prejudiced standards. "Something's definitely wrong," Frank muttered. Just a small excuse, and they had it, unannounced lane change. A ridiculous excuse, but enough to give the green light to the familiar scenario: stop, ask, threaten, suggest. And if they were lucky, they'd get someone to pull out their wallet just to get away with it and move on. With her fancy car, expensive clothes, and honey-colored skin, she must have, in their narrow-minded thinking, gotten the money from a shady source. And most importantly, she seemed smart enough to know that fighting them would only invite more trouble. $2,000, the amount they suggested as a cheap ticket to peace. An easy price to pay for a scared person. They thought she'd just bow her head, sign the check, and drive away quietly like so many victims before her. But they were wrong. Completely wrong. What they didn't see, or weren't wise enough to see, was the cold calculation behind those hazy eyes. Her perfect exterior wasn't a cover for a life of luxury, it was a cover for a mission. An operation. A trap. Isabel Amaro, or more accurately, undercover federal agent Isabel Dubois, was a key figure in Operation Nightshade, a massive investigation that would expose a network of money laundering, smuggling, and, ironically, corrupt cops like Frank and Tony. Little did they know that their actions today were not just a mistake. They were fatally wrong. Because this game wasn't theirs anymore. And as the pale golden light of Wednesday afternoon began to cast long shadows across Riverfront Boulevard, where the Serenity River sparkled and Central Park lay still, the two men who had thought they were masters of the game began to realize. They were mere pawns, walking straight into the hands of a queen who wore no crown, but whose justice was as sharp as a knife. And the endgame was drawing near. 40 years old, with thinning salt and pepper hair and a face marked by time, Frank Miller entered the frame like a cold ghost. His eyes were narrowed, filled with suspicion and spite, and he smiled a sneer as he spotted his target, a big fish. He nudged his colleague in the passenger seat, Tony Russo, a 30-year-old officer of Italian descent, with slicked-back hair, a slightly mischievous face but a sharp gaze. Russo squinted at the jet-black Mercedes E-Class in front. "Nice car," he muttered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Brand new, must have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's definitely not just a car." Miller followed his teammate's gaze. The driver was a young woman, dressed in an uncannily elegant manner. Not a call girl, no, she was high class. A drug lord's favorite mistress, or a dealer skilled at making dirty money. These guys, Miller curled his lips, his contempt clear in every word, always have their wallets full of dirty money. Alone, at noon, on a deserted road. Good food. Russo let out a dry laugh, his fingers tapping the dashboard. "No coffee money today, boss." Miller nodded, his eyes flashing with recklessness. "Easy to deal with during the day. Few people, few cameras. Just make up a good excuse." "Got it, roger that, boss." Russo straightened, ready to play the part. Miller checked his surroundings one last time. The road was empty. No other cars. He stepped on the gas. The patrol car roared to life, hurtling toward the Mercedes. The red-green lights on the roof flashed in the harsh sunlight. The siren blew a short, sharp, urgent blast. "Izzy, sitting in the Mercedes, glanced in the rearview mirror. The flashing lights reflected a warning. Her heart skipped a beat, but her appearance remained completely calm. She took a deep breath, reminded herself, Isabelle Dubois, successful, arrogant, but harmless businesswoman. She turned on her signal, slowly pulling the car to the side of the road under the shade of an ancient oak tree. The trap was set. But who was the hunter, who was the prey? Only time would tell. The Mercedes stopped. The engine was still roaring softly. The police car pulled up behind her, its lights still flashing, adding to the tension in the already peaceful afternoon air. The police car doors opened almost at the same time. Miller and Russo got out, wearing dark glasses that covered most of their faces, trying to appear cool and unpredictable. Miller headed straight for the driver's side door, while Russo slid around to the rear, pretending to check the license plate and taillights, then took up position by the passenger side, his eyes taking in both the occupants and the surroundings, a perfect pincer maneuver. Miller rapped twice on the window with his ringed knuckle, the sound as dry as a knock on the door of hell. He waited a few seconds, then said, "Hello, Sterling Point Police Department. Would you please roll down your window and present your license and registration?" Inside the car, Izzy kept her expression unchanged. She slowly lowered her window enough to exchange papers, creating a safe distance. The scent of grass from the park wafted through, mingling with the air like a false note. "Hello, gentlemen," she said softly, with a subtle hint of surprise. "What's going on, officer? Did I do something wrong?" She opened her Chanel bag and took out her license and registration. All were classic counterfeits, manufactured by the FBI's technical department, so sophisticated they were impossible to tell apart. Miller snatched them away without a word of thanks. His eyes were fixed on the details of the paperwork, his voice even but meaningful. "The reason we pulled you over is because you made an unsafe lane change on the curve ahead. You almost caused a traffic hazard." A vague accusation, hard to verify. Izzy didn't respond. "I definitely used my turn signal," she replied, still polite, still in control. "And I didn't see any other cars nearby." Her somewhat arrogant calm made Miller's mouth twitch slightly. His eyes scanned the interior of the car, the fine leather, the modern dashboard, the designer bag hanging from the passenger seat. Jealousy and prejudice began to seep deeper into his voice. "Mrs. Dubois," he asked slowly, his voice sweet as poison, "what do you do for a living, that you can afford to drive a Mercedes and wear designer clothes like that?" Izzy smiled slightly, her eyes never leaving the person in front of her. "Import business," Izzy replied, her voice gradually revealing her annoyance. The question was not only tactless but also slightly probing, making her feel violated. "Import business?" Miller smirked, his eyes scrutinizing her as if he had just found a weakness. "Importing white goods, or heavy smuggling?" At the same time, Russo, after circling the car, approached Miller's window, speaking loudly so Izzy could hear. "Hey, Frank, look. Under the car, near the exhaust, there are some white powders. I also smell something strange, like chemicals." Izzy bit her lip. She knew this. It was a poorly staged act. The white powder could be road dust, and the chemical smell was obviously fabricated. But she had to keep her cool. Miller immediately used the discovery as an excuse. He turned to Izzy, his face artificially serious. "Mrs. Dubois, you heard it too. The smell of chemicals. White powder. We've had multiple reports of drug activity in this park area. There's every reason to suspect you're involved. By law, we have the right to search your car here, and if necessary, to detain you for further investigation at headquarters." He emphasized each word, as if to sear the consequences into Izzy's mind: arrest, registration, ruin. Isabel, as Izzy, pretended to be stunned, her eyes wide. "What are you talking about? Drugs? That's ridiculous. I'm a proper businesswoman. You can't search my car without a warrant." She raised her voice deliberately, a mix of worry and resistance, but inside, her mind was racing. They'd done this more than once. They knew how to apply pressure, knew their prey's weaknesses. Miller leaned in, his voice suddenly soft, full of sympathy. "Look, Mrs. Du Bois, you don't seem like the type of person who's going to commit a crime. Maybe this is just a misunderstanding, or someone's trying to set you up. Who knows?" He shrugged, then continued in a honeyed voice, "But once the report is filed, things will get complicated. Searches, white powder tests, interrogations, it will take a lot of time and affect your reputation, especially since you're a prominent businesswoman. If the press finds out, it'll be troublesome." He paused, glancing around as if checking to see if anyone was paying attention. The street was still empty, the afternoon sunlight was pale and sultry. Miller leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "However, we can be a little flexible. If you cooperate, the white powder thing can be dropped. It could be a traffic violation, a lot less serious." He looked straight into Izzy's eyes, through his sunglasses, his voice even and cool. "A little compensation. As a thank you for working in this heat." 2 fingers raised. A signal, $2,000. Not enough to shock, but enough to feel pressured. Russo stood behind him, arms crossed, silent but a shadowy presence. His dark glasses made his gaze even colder. Izzy swallowed. The fake confusion was perfect. I don't understand. What did I do wrong? Why should I pay?" She looked from Miller to Russo, then back to Miller. Her eyes hesitated, as if pleading for help. I don't have much cash on me. I need to call a lawyer." It was a delay. And she was testing their reaction. Miller and Russo exchanged a discreet look. Miller smacked his lips, his smile fading. "A lawyer will only complicate things. If you call a lawyer, I'll be forced to do the right thing, search the car, arrest you, and file a drug possession report. Do you want that?" He snarled, $2,000 for your freedom and a clean name. That's a small price to pay, Mrs. Du Bois. On a public road, in broad daylight, the extortion was being carried out brazenly by people with badges. Izzy knew, this was the turning point. The decision she made now would determine the rest of the mission. She exhaled, her hands shaking on the wheel as she struggled to keep her composure, an impeccable performance. "Okay," she said, her voice full of reluctance and desperation. "I don't want any trouble, I don't really have $2,000 in cash," Izzy said, her voice small but anxious, her eyes behind her sunglasses pleading. "Can I get to the nearest ATM? There's a branch not far from here." Miller and Russo glanced at each other over their dark glasses, a brief glance that conveyed the message they'd both been waiting for, the bait was hooked, and it was about to be pulled out of the water. Miller seemed to think for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice condescending but his eyes still cold, "but we're going to follow your car. Just to make sure you don't pull any tricks. Once you're done withdrawing the money, come back here immediately to finish things up." He didn't want to let her escape, but he didn't want to draw attention by being too close or too obvious in his pressure. "Yeah, I understand," Izzy nodded, her voice still shaking, as if she'd just been thrown into a situation that was too much for her to bear. But inside, she wasn't afraid, she was just counting the beats of time. By the time Miller returned to the patrol car to listen to the radio briefing, an excuse to keep up appearances, Izzy had a few precious seconds to herself. Her hand moved lightly over the Mercedes center console, as if adjusting the air conditioning or changing the radio station. But in reality, her finger had just pressed a small, camouflaged button near the gearshift, a switch that activated the car's built-in audio system and hidden cameras. At the same time, she glanced down at the smartwatch on her wrist, swiped the screen, and entered a preset code. A Level 2 alert was instantly sent, along with precise GPS coordinates, to Supervisory Agent David Chen and the Nightshade team that was monitoring the operation. The signal was clear, the target had taken the bait, and was moving toward the backup rendezvous point B. The Mercedes rolled smoothly, and the patrol car followed closely behind. Izzy kept a moderate speed, heading for Central Park parking lot B, a place she had chosen in advance because it had blind spots, escape routes, and most importantly, had been surveyed and pre-arranged by the FBI. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that was flooding her body. It had to be perfect. The two cars pulled into the deserted late-afternoon parking lot. Izzy pulled the car to a stop in a shady corner near a thicket of bushes. She turned off the engine. The patrol car stopped a few feet away. Miller and Russo got out, their faces showing a mixture of eagerness and impatience. "Hurry, Mrs. Du Bois," Miller snapped, "where's the money?" Izzy took a deep breath, opened the car door, still clutching her Chanel bag. She pretended to rummage through it, her eyes slightly panicked. "Here. I just withdrew, $2,000. But before she could finish her sentence, the FBI's plan was fired. From behind the trees and other entrances to the parking lot, 3 black SUVs that looked like ordinary vehicles suddenly rushed in at breakneck speed. They skidded, blocking all exits. The doors opened simultaneously, and more than a dozen agents in plain clothes but in jet-black combat armor, hooded and holding modern assault rifles rushed out. They all moved like a programmed tactical machine, fast, silent, and with terrifying precision. "Everybody put your hands on your heads. Don't move." The commander's voice thundered, coming from a handheld speaker. Miller and Russo stood frozen. Their faces were white, their lips quivering, their eyes wide open as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing in the middle of the day. The greed and complacency of just seconds ago had evaporated, replaced by a primal fear. In the midst of the circle, Izzy Morrow slowly straightened. She removed her Gucci sunglasses, revealing cold, piercing amber eyes. She ran her hand through her hair, removing the pearl brooch. Her thick black hair fell loose, and with it, the image of the wealthy Isabelle Du Bois disappeared. In its place, stood Agent Isabella Morrow, a warrior of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She walked slowly, surely toward the 2 policemen, each step a sentence. When she was only a few feet away, she pulled a shiny gold badge from her vest pocket and held it up for them to see. The FBI badge. Her voice rang out, cold and sharp as steel. "Officer Frank Miller. Officer Tony Russo. You are under federal arrest." Her eyes swept over both of their faces, contorted with fear. "I am Special Agent Isabella Morrow, with the Organized Crime and Public Corruption Unit, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are charged with conspiracy, extortion, and civil rights violations under Section 242 of Title 18, United States Code." Each word was like a hammer coming down on Miller and Russo. There was no escape, no more games. There was only the cold truth. And justice was coming, too fast. Too terrible. They had finally hit the beautiful black woman they had despised, and hit her the wrong way. They had thought she was easy prey, someone who could be threatened, coerced, humiliated, and robbed like all their other victims. But Isabella Morrow was no weak businesswoman. She was an FBI agent, smart, fearless, and uncompromising. And they, Frank Miller and Tony Russo, had walked right into the perfect trap she had set. They had not only exposed themselves, but had personally handed the FBI the most incontrovertible evidence of their crimes. The fallout was swift and complete. Miller was gasping for breath, his mouth unable to form words. His legs were shaking, as if he were standing on crumbling ground. Russo, his pale eyes wet with tears, squeezed shut as if trying to escape the reality that was crushing him. The dream of getting rich quick through power and prejudice had turned into a nightmare. They faced not only years in prison for simple extortion, but serious federal charges that could land them in federal prison for decades. The net was wide open. The FBI had been patient, quiet, and then, in broad daylight. When Miranda was read to them, both were silent. No words of protest. Faces were as white as the living dead. The scene was cordoned off with signature yellow tape. The federal forensics team arrived immediately, collecting every detail with cold precision. The undeniable evidence came from the Mercedes. The car had been secretly wired with audio and video recording devices by Agent Morrow himself. In it, the entire conversation and the acts of extortion, abuse of power, and vicious racial slurs were clearly recorded. The news that 2 Sterling Point Police Department officers had been arrested in broad daylight on suspicion of corruption and extortion spread like wildfire. The public was shocked. The city's police chief and mayor held an emergency press conference, pledging full cooperation with the federal investigation team led by Captain Ava Rotova. Miller and Russo were immediately suspended without pay, pending the outcome of the investigation and prosecution. But what was more horrifying was that the case did not stop with the extortion of Morrow. The investigation widened, uncovering their past, personal records, finances, shady relationships, suspicious phone calls, all of which the FBI dug up without missing a beat. Was this an isolated incident, or part of a larger criminal network being tracked as part of Operation Nightshade? All signs pointed to the latter. This chance trap turned into a major breakthrough. Agent Morrow's precise and incisive testimony, along with video and audio evidence, made any denials futile. There was no way back. There was no escape. Miller and Russo may have tried to blame each other, or hoped for a plea deal to reduce their sentences, but federal prosecutors were determined to go after them, sending a stark message. Corruption and racism will never be tolerated in law enforcement. The images of the 2 former officers standing in the dock, heads bowed, facing charges, became a poignant symbol of the dark side of those who were supposed to uphold justice. When the audio and video recordings were released in court, after security clearance, they laid it all bare: greed, ruthlessness, and prejudice. The final sentence came as no surprise to anyone: 7 years in federal prison for each. They were permanently discharged, losing their pensions and benefits. The verdict was more than a punishment, it was a wake-up call, a declaration from the federal justice system: we will not turn a blind eye to evil wearing a badge. After fulfilling her role as a key witness, Agent Isabella Morrow quietly withdrew. Under the cover of identity Isabel Dubois, she continued to quietly infiltrate the underworld, where Operation Nightshade was still ongoing. The arrest of the 2 corrupt cops was more than a victory. It was a breakthrough, and she, the one who held the key to unlocking the entire maze of evil behind it. Necessary chaos, the beginning of a new order. Sitting alone in her Mercedes E-Class, Izzy quietly navigated the familiar streets of Sterling Point. The streetlights reflected off the windshield like hazy streaks of light in the night, and inside her, a storm of thoughts was quietly churning. The recent incident was more than a symptom. It was a wake-up call, a clear demonstration of the toxic intersection of 2 societal cancers, corruption and prejudice. When they meet in the same system of power, they not only distort justice but also create fertile ground for opportunists to wreak havoc on an already fragile community. Izzy knew this better than anyone. As an undercover FBI agent, she had seen what no one wanted to see: the secret handshakes between cops and criminals, the lies covered up by badges and uniforms. But what haunted her most was the audacity of the evil. How could such a cruel act happen in broad daylight, on a street that seemed peaceful? She couldn't find the answers, but she knew she had to keep fighting. This fight required more than reason, it required a brave heart, a strong belief in the values of justice and human dignity. Because when power and weapons are given to those with prejudice, the result is always destruction, sometimes lives, sometimes entire communities. Izzy was a silent warrior. She walked in the shadows, not to be a hero, but to protect the light for others. Every time justice was served, even a small victory, she felt a surge of strength, not from pride, but from the faith in the mission she had chosen. She knew she was not alone. People like her, no matter where they are, no matter how quietly, are keeping the faith in a better world alive. Especially for those who have no voice, for communities often forgotten in the shadow of power and prejudice. Izzy's eyes are still fixed straight ahead. Steadfast. Determined. Whatever darkness or challenge awaits around the next corner, she is ready. Because today's chaos is, sometimes, the foundation for a more just order tomorrow.